Hello, I am Jason, the curator of comics, with a special edition of Comics Corner. Better late than never in regards to talking about the historic 50th issue of Batman that recently came out involving the wedding between Batman and Catwoman, Selina Kyle. And oh boy, well, there was quite a bit of controversy surrounding the title. First and foremost, as can sometimes happen in the internet era of comics, the actual ending of the story was kinda sorta leaked beforehand. Now, granted, I hate to say I told you so, but if you check out CCN Comics Corner News episode 1, where I talked about the actual wedding itself, the idea of the wedding being, actually put to print in, a couple of months ago, I said I was pretty sure this wasn't going to last. Either one of the two parties involved was going to end up dead only to be found out as not dead, or Selina would probably get cold feet and walk away, leaving Batman at the altar, and wouldn't you know it, the latter happened indeed. Oh yeah, spoiler alert. Well, I won't spoil. In fact, I'm going to be labeling a big fat spoiler alert for the wedding's real conclusion, as well as the follow-up issue of Catwoman #1, because they launched a new Catwoman series in the wake of Batman issue 50. Now, for the record, I'm not going to spoil every little detail there is. I'm not going to spoil, everything, but it's worth mentioning that the way that they did this, I feel, was poorly handled. Now, granted, I can understand the idea of Catwoman being the one that gets cold feet and wants to leave Bruce or Batman at the altar. I can also kind of understand why Batman, aka Bruce, wanted to just have this be a marriage between their costumed identities, Batman and Catwoman, and not have Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne officially tie the knot because of, well, Bruce Wayne's lifestyle. And the idea that, Selina Kyle being around wouldn't necessarily be so much of a hindrance to his lifestyle as it would be, just kind of a believable, it's Bruce Wayne, billionaire playboy, we'll just let it slide kind of thing. But unfortunately, I don't feel like they even tried to make this work. Now, I feel I should also disclose that the writer of the comic actually received death threats, which I'm not okay with under any circumstance. In fact, the poor guy had to go to San Diego Comic-Con with a bodyguard in tow just to enjoy the convention, and that's not fair. If anything, you should blame the New York Times, who actually were responsible for leaking the ending of the story, which ultimately did upset the fans, and I can't say I blame them. Like I said, it's not even really so much that the ending was bad or that the ending was a slap in the face, so much as that it was like you didn't even try to make it work. I mean, at least you didn't Spider-Man One More Day us by saying that you pretend that it never happened and all these great, glorious memories that we have between the two never happened. And for the record, if I'm being perfectly honest, I do feel like Selina Kyle and as Catwoman is probably the best match for Batman, both on a romantic and intellectual level. There's just something about the two that, while you may consider them opposites, they just kind of mesh for me really well. I don't know why. I mean, if Bruce was to pick a random love interest that, he actually had to marry, I wouldn't be disappointed if he chose Selina instead of Talia al Ghul. And even then, the only reason you could argue that Talia al Ghul would be a decent choice would be because, well, they have a kid together. But even then, we know that marriage didn't work out either. So, yeah, the idea could be made that Bruce Wayne or Batman as a character is not meant to be married, and that's kind of the idea that the comic kind of highlights. That Selina believes that a marriage to Batman would take Batman away from the world, which is absolutely ludicrous considering that they were going to be married as characters, as their costume personas, implying that, Batman was still going to be doing Batman things. Now, I could understand Selina getting apprehensive of, oh, Bruce will never ever stop putting himself in danger as long as he physically can. Yeah, that's a real issue, but again, I feel like Selina didn't even try. But no, here's the real kick in the teeth in regards to this ending, and what I honest to God don't understand about it. You see, Holly Robinson, who is a supporting character from the Catwoman books of yore and in current Catwoman books, is decided to essentially be the best woman, or essentially be the witness for the wedding, for lack of a better term. And she actually apparently, although it's not quite clarified, somehow manages to get Selina to kind of back off. Or at the very least, it's implied. It's not outright stated. It's absolutely ludicrous, but then this gets even weirder and stupider, arguably. By at the very end, there's a scene of a whole bunch of villains with Bane on this big chair, like he's, the freaking king or something of the whole Gotham villain world. And he's basically standing there with Holly Robinson in the room and the villains in the room saying, "Yes, I have psychologically broken the bat." I hope you prefer my Bane impression over Tom Hardy's Bane. Sorry, Tom. But no, I'm not doing that Batman voice. Or I'm not doing that Bane voice. Nope. Can't do it. But I have to ask, Bane, you really think that this is going to break Batman? I mean, you act like he's never known love and had to give it up. Again, I remind you that in the DC Rebirth continuity, Damian still exists, so he's technically had a love and a marriage not work out for him in this continuity. You're not exactly breaking new ground by having Selina leave him at the altar. And if you just so happen to turn Holly against Catwoman and therefore convince her, well then, congratulations. You might have given Catwoman a little bit more ammunition to want to leave because, like I said, the comic implies that she was kind of sort of going to leave anyways, and the idea behind the whole thing was basically kind of pointing in that direction anyways, regardless of how it happened. Now, I will say one thing about the Catwoman issue 1 that this actually leads into, and by lead into, I mean it basically just gives Catwoman a new series to play with, as Batman is going to be going off and fighting Mr. Freeze, I believe, as of issue 51. So, yeah, enjoy that, as they're pretty much going to be separated for at least a couple of months, if not a year, probably, in comic timeline. Or at least not until the next crossover. That's a possibility, too. But anyways, Catwoman basically goes across the world and basically to the other side of the country and basically ends up running into a situation where a whole bunch of people are for some reason impersonating Catwoman as both burglars and mercenaries. In fact, you're almost led to believe that it is Selina herself that actually uses guns to gun down a bunch of cops, which is absolutely ludicrous because the moment I read that, I'm like, okay, it's either a clone or it's some rogue cat person to dress like Catwoman. And the weirdest thing is it's like, at the very end, when you see all of the women dressed up like Catwoman, as Selina goes up this elevator lift to greet them, you're like, what is this, a Catwoman cosplay convention? For crying out freaking loud, what the heck is this? But yeah, that's kind of the basic story. The idea that Selina has to clear her name as Catwoman, it seems to be the early premise for her book. Now, as I speak, issue 2 hasn't come out, but yeah. Now, one thing I should mention about the wedding, well, are actually two things. Number one, there were a couple of tie-ins, one-shots before the wedding comic itself. They're not necessary reading. They're all just kind of preludes into what actually goes on. I believe there's 5 of them, and the only one that I actually read was Red Hood versus Anarchy. And oh boy, I gotta admit that I do not like what they did with Anarchy at all. I don't know whose idea it was to transform him in this new continuity, but he essentially is a socialist communist style character. And I'm not even going to get into the socio-political things about, how I personally disagree with those political beliefs and, economic beliefs. But rather, I will simply state that's not what Anarchy was. Anarchy was a very much was very much so a philosophical and very, very deranged at times, but also very, very good at distinguishing and cutting to the core of what was wrong with society and Gotham in general. The fact that you went from that to essentially somebody who tries to have a whole bunch of radical groups form together who have no common cause, not even to his own, yeah, that technically fits the mold of an anarchist or a guy that would be named Anarchy, but it's not necessarily what I want from Anarchy. Not to mention, I hate his new character design. He looks like a glamour model with his blonde freaking hair. Doesn't even look like his mask fits him anymore. He doesn't even wear a hood either. It's like, come on. You really had to take all of this and change it. You had to change Anarchy. Really? I mean, come on. It's not like he had a couple fans like me and you had to ruin him. Okay, ruin's a strong word, but you had to change him. Really? There are a couple of other ones, including Harley Quinn facing off with the Joker, and, Batgirl, and basically the entire Bat family doing various things. Red Hood's kind of fighting against Anarchy to basically help make sure that Selena Kyle has a successful bachelorette party. Yeah, basically, it's kind of just an excuse to get Red Hood to fight Anarchy. Really nothing more, unfortunately. But, in considering all of how the wedding actually ended, a very moot point indeed. Now, the other thing I will say about the wedding issue is they did a great job getting a lot of artists together and a lot of great artists and colorists from the DC universe, both past and present, that have worked on Batman and basically created a series of splash pages with Catwoman and Batman in their various, universe costumes, and their armor types that they've had over the years. It's really, really cool and a very, very distinct way of doing the story. Now, the story itself, it feels in terms of the writing, when these splash pages come up, feels about as redundant as a Frank Miller story in terms of dialogue. Seriously, Batman says one thing, Catwoman says another. And for some reason, the biggest focus of the entire issue is talking about how they see things in each other's eyes. I know that's something that lovers often comment on, but really, most of the dialogue is talking about how they don't see fear, or they see certain emotions in their respective eyes, and they're somehow able to make determinations about their personalities as a result of it. And really, the rest of the dialogue, in the non-splash pages with that aren't, featuring them in their various costumes over the years, drawn, again, very, very well by various artists of many times in Batman lore. But, it's just kind of ridiculous because the rest of the dialogue is really kind of just basic dialogue. It's almost like they wanted an excuse to get all of these artists together for this milestone issue, but they didn't want to give away the game in terms of, what the plot might be, or that the plot itself could be condensed into a smaller issue, because, lest we forget, with all of these splash pages, which each take up about a full page of comic, we're essentially stretching out the issue by a full double it, or by doubling the issue rather. And that's kind of sort of disappointing when it just kind of feels like padding. Again, especially when, like I said, the dialogue is just kind of hitting the same points as one another. It's just putting a slightly different perspective spin on it when Batman talks or when Selena talks. But they talk about essentially the same thing in each and every single one of these pairing panels. It's really, really silly. And overall, it's just a big disappointment for what could have been a very, very interesting issue. I'll give credit where credit's due for keeping me on my toes and surprising me by not having, say, villains crash the wedding or the Joker try to blow up the wedding, and then Catwoman basically say that, as long as there's a Joker, or as long as there's, crazy Arkham villains coming after Bruce, that there will never be a couple kind of thing. But I feel like they went in the other direction in terms of how they could have resolved this in terms of an anticlimax. The idea that Selina just walks away and that for whatever reason Holly Robinson turned on Catwoman and Batman, which again isn't really even shown nor hinted at. I mean, Holly Robinson really didn't even do a thing to convince Catwoman that marrying Batman was a bad idea. In fact, in the comic, the moment that they get to Bruce Wayne's manor and she sees everything that's there at the manor, she actually goes out of her way to congratulate Selina on a good catch of a husband. In other words, she supported the marriage. It makes no sense for her to have been a witness to this, especially considering that she was, quote unquote, one of Selina's best friends, and then all of a sudden turn on Selina, and then for Bane at the end of the comic to idiotically insinuate that somehow this psychologically breaks Batman, even though he's had arguably far more heartbreaks and, has actually had people die that he cares about. Hell, the Joker's killed Jason Todd, the second Robin. That left a scar on Batman probably more than this. And that's also considering that Jason Todd wasn't even that well liked a Robin to begin with. He was a punk in many regards, and Batman still mourned his death far more than that of probably Catwoman leaving the altar. If anything, Batman probably was surprised that Selina not just left him a note instead of, actually saying it directly to his face because, well, Selina usually is pretty upfront with how she feels about Bruce. She'll play cat and mouse, no pun intended, but she'll usually spell out what she's thinking and feeling for Batman at any given one time. And for her to just kind of up and leave, and that to be basically just a launching pad for her own solo series, just feels weak. You didn't need that to be the case. You couldn't have just had them married and have them do their own thing. Heck, if Catwoman's going to be truly reformed, or if she's going to be an anti-hero like this new series implicates, did she really have to go to Italy, or was it France? I can't even remember where they put her. They put her in Europe for some reason. I guess because, Catwoman's fancy like that, and she prefers, fine fashion, fine culture, and all that stuff. Whatever. In the end, Batman issue 50 is not a bad, little anniversary thing for your comic collection. I'm just saying, if you were expecting it to be as a passionate and, a memorable comic wedding in the Batman universe as, say, when Dick Grayson married Starfire, or when Batman married Talia al Ghul back in the 80s, you're going to be sorely disappointed, as it doesn't really even stack up to those. Heck, I think Batman himself has had other fictional weddings to regular universe characters that measured up a little bit better than this. It's not even that it's a badly written or badly drawn comic, because it's not. A lot of the artwork is great, especially those splash pages, reminding you of just how colorful and varied the comic, or both the comics and the costumes between Batman and Catwoman have been over the years. But all in all, the story that it tries to tell just feels kind of weak. And for the whole idea for Batman to kind of jump into a battle with Mr. Freeze, as is advertised at the very back of the book, and to continue the Batman run, just feels kind of sort of lazy and out of left field. It's not terrible, but it is fairly disappointing. So I hope you found maybe some enjoyment in that, and who knows, maybe I'll talk about the one-shot preludes if I actually get my hands on any of them, and see if maybe they add anything to the overall story of the wedding. But considering that they were just one-shots and they were just kind of side stories, I highly doubt it. But regardless, I'd still like to thank each and every single one of you for listening. I hope you enjoy. This is Jason, the curator of comics, signing off.